Imagine being the victim of the first murder in human history, killed by your own brother. Abel, the second son of Adam and Eve, met this tragic fate when his brother Cain became consumed with jealousy. In this video, we'll explore the heart-wrenching story of Abel, the first martyr, and how his death marked the beginning of sin's devastating impact on humanity. By watching, you'll uncover the deep spiritual lessons hidden in Abel's story, including the importance of living with integrity and offering God our best. Have you ever faced injustice or felt rejected for doing what's right? Abel's story will inspire you to stand firm in your faith, no matter the cost. Before we dive into this powerful tale, be sure to like and subscribe. Your support helps us share this important story with others who need to hear it. Let's uncover the truth behind Abel's life and death together. Abel was the second son of Adam and Eve, born after the fall of mankind in the Garden of Eden. His older brother, Cain, became a farmer, working the land to grow crops, while Abel became a shepherd, tending to sheep. This difference in their roles would eventually play a key part in the events that unfolded between them. Abel's work as a shepherd was not just a job, it also symbolized a life of sacrifice and care, a role that would contrast with Cain's more self-reliant farming lifestyle. Though they each had different paths, both brothers were part of the early human family and had the opportunity to honor God in their own ways. As they grew, both Cain and Abel made offerings to God. In Genesis 4 verses 3-5, we learn that Cain brought an offering of fruits from his crops, while Abel brought a lamb from his flock. The act of offering was a way for both brothers to show their devotion to God. However, while Cain's offering was rejected by God, Abel's offering was accepted. The reason for this difference isn't explicitly stated in the text, but it's clear that Abel's offering came from a heart of faith, while Cain's offering might not have been given with the same sincerity. This moment was significant because it showed the importance of the heart behind the gift, not just the gift itself. Abel's offering was accepted because it demonstrated a genuine faith and obedience to God. The lamb that Abel offered was a sacrificial gift, symbolizing the idea of giving something valuable to honor God. Abel's faithfulness in making this offering showed his trust in God's goodness. On the other hand, Cain's offering of produce from his land, while a gift, seemed to lack the deeper commitment and faith that Abel's offering displayed. This contrast between their offerings would set the stage for the tension that developed between the brothers. The rejection of Cain's offering deeply affected him. Instead of reflecting on his offering and seeking to understand why God rejected it, Cain became angry and dejected. God, in his mercy, spoke to Cain, warning him that sin was waiting to take control of his heart, and he needed to overcome it. This interaction demonstrates how God cares about our hearts and how we approach him. Not just what we bring, but the attitude behind it. Cain's anger would ultimately lead him down a destructive path, while Abel's faith would continue to shine as an example. Abel's acceptance by God was a pivotal moment, showing how a heart aligned with faith and obedience is what God desires. Abel's willingness to give God his best, even if it required sacrifice, set him apart. His example teaches us that offerings and acts of worship are not just about the material things we give, but about giving from a sincere and faithful heart. Abel's offering was more than a simple gift, it was an expression of his trust in God's sovereignty and goodness. In contrast, Cain's rejection teaches us about the dangers of pride and anger. When our offerings come from a place of pride or without true devotion, we risk missing the mark of what God desires from us. Cain's story serves as a warning that unchecked emotions, like jealousy and anger, can lead us away from God's purpose for our lives. Abel, by contrast, remains an example of the kind of faith that pleases God, showing us that how we offer our lives and worship matters just as much as the gifts we bring. After God rejected Cain's offering, his reaction was one of intense anger and jealousy. In Genesis 4 verses 5-7, we see how Cain's face fell and his heart became bitter. He was upset not just because his offering was rejected, but also because Abel's was accepted. Cain's jealousy grew as he compared himself to his brother, and instead of reflecting on why his offering was not accepted, he let his anger take hold. God, in his mercy, warned Cain that sin was waiting to control him, but he must overcome it. God's message was clear: Cain had a choice to make. He could address his feelings and change his heart, or he could allow anger and jealousy to consume him. Sadly, Cain chose the latter, allowing his emotions to spiral out of control. Instead of listening to God's warning, Cain allowed his jealousy to fester. His anger toward Abel grew stronger, and instead of dealing with it in a healthy way, he began to plot against his brother. Cain's reaction shows how dangerous unchecked anger and jealousy can be. Rather than seeking understanding or reconciliation, Cain let these destructive emotions dictate his actions. This moment is a powerful reminder of how negative emotions can cloud our judgment and lead us down a path of sin. In a moment of uncontrolled rage, Cain lured Abel out into the field. Once they were alone, Cain's anger reached its peak, and he killed Abel. This was the first murder in human history. Cain's actions marked a tragic moment, not just for the brothers, but for all of humanity. This was a devastating result of Cain's jealousy and his failure to master his emotions. His crime set a dark precedent for the destructive consequences that unchecked anger can have, and it would have far-reaching effects on his own life and the world. Cain's decision to kill Abel was not just an act of violence, it was the result of his unwillingness to deal with his inner turmoil. His jealousy had grown so strong that it led him to commit the first murder. Instead of taking responsibility for his actions and learning from God's warning, Cain allowed his emotions to control him. His actions were driven by the belief that his brother's favor with God diminished his own worth. In reality, Cain's jealousy and anger only caused him greater loss. He lost his brother and created a deep rift between himself and God. The murder of Abel was not just a tragic loss for the brothers, but it was a significant moment in human history. It was the first time sin resulted in the taking of a life, and it set a tragic example for humanity. From this moment onward, the world would be marked by the consequences of sin, anger, jealousy, and violence. Cain's actions remind us of the deep damage that unchecked negative emotions can cause. His inability to deal with his jealousy led to irreversible consequences, both for his relationship with his brother and his standing before God. Cain's jealousy and the murder of Abel serve as a powerful lesson for us today. They remind us of the importance of managing our emotions and being aware of how jealousy and anger can lead to harmful actions. Cain's failure to listen to God's warning ultimately cost him dearly, and his story is a cautionary tale about the destructive power of unchecked negative emotions. It calls us to be more mindful of how we respond to our feelings and to seek reconciliation, rather than allowing anger and jealousy to control our actions. After Cain killed Abel, God confronted him about his actions. In Genesis 4 verses 9 to 15, God asked Cain where his brother was. Instead of taking responsibility for his actions, Cain lied, saying, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" This response showed Cain's defiance and refusal to accept accountability for his sin. But God, knowing what had happened, immediately responded to Cain's actions. He told Cain that Abel's blood cried out to him from the ground and that Cain's sin would not go unpunished. As a consequence, Cain was cursed and made to wander the earth, unable to settle anywhere. His punishment was severe, and it highlighted the irreversible consequences of his sin. God's justice was clear. Cain's actions had broken the trust between him, his brother, and God, and he would now live with the consequences of his crime. The punishment God gave Cain also served as a warning to future generations about the destructive power of sin. By making Cain a wanderer, God removed him from the community, making it difficult for him to build a life or form relationships. This was a powerful reminder that sin not only harms others but also isolates us from God and from the people around us. Cain's sin affected his relationship with God, his family, and the future of humanity. God's confrontation with Cain was a necessary step in addressing the gravity of his crime and ensuring that justice was served. Despite the severity of Cain's punishment, God showed mercy. In Genesis 4 verse 15, God placed a mark on Cain to protect him from being killed by others. This mark was a sign of God's mercy, ensuring that Cain would not be murdered by anyone seeking revenge for Abel's death. The mark served as a reminder that, even though Cain had sinned terribly, God still extended a form of protection to him. This act of mercy was significant because it showed that God's justice and mercy coexist. Even though Cain had committed a grave sin, God was still willing to offer him some measure of care and protection. The mark of Cain is a powerful symbol of God's justice and mercy working together. On one hand, God's justice was evident in the consequences Cain faced for killing his brother. Cain was held accountable for his actions, and his punishment was just. But on the other hand, God's mercy was clear in the protection he provided, ensuring that Cain would not be killed by others. This act of mercy highlights the complexity of God's character. He is just, but he is also merciful and desires to offer grace, even to those who have sinned deeply. This moment in the Bible teaches us an important lesson about the nature of sin and God's response to it. Sin has consequences, and those consequences can be severe, as seen in Cain's life. But God's mercy is also available, even to those who have committed serious wrongs. The mark on Cain symbolizes the possibility of redemption and the opportunity for God's grace to be extended, even in the midst of justice. It shows that while our actions have consequences, God's mercy is never far from us. God's response to Cain's sin demonstrates both his justice and his mercy. Cain's actions had dire consequences, but God also provided a way for Cain to live, showing that even in the face of wrongdoing, God's mercy can still be extended. This balance between justice and mercy is a key aspect of God's character and a lesson for us all. We are reminded that our sins have consequences, but we are also reminded that God offers mercy and protection, even when we least deserve it. Abel's offering to God demonstrated the importance of faith and obedience. In contrast to Cain, who offered the fruits of his labor with a lack of sincerity, Abel gave his best, a lamb from his flock. Abel's offering was accepted because it reflected his heart of trust in God. He didn't just give something. He gave something valuable and meaningful, showing his faith and obedience to God's commands. This teaches us that it's not just about what we offer to God, but the attitude behind it. God looks at the heart and desires us to give to him with a genuine spirit of faith, trust, and obedience, just as Abel did. Abel's offering contrasts sharply with Cain's. Cain's offering, although it may have been a good gift, lacked the faith and sincerity that Abel displayed. Cain's attitude was one of duty rather than devotion, and this difference was what caused his offering to be rejected by God. Cain's heart wasn't in the right place. His offering wasn't a reflection of his trust in God or his willingness to give his best. This shows us that God values our hearts above our actions. It's not enough to go through the motions. God wants us to truly trust him and follow his guidance with obedience. The contrast between Abel and Cain also highlights the destructive nature of sin, jealousy, and anger. After God rejected his offering, Cain became consumed with jealousy and anger toward his brother. Instead of addressing these feelings and seeking reconciliation, Cain allowed them to fester. This unchecked jealousy led him down a dangerous path, ultimately resulting in the murder of his brother Abel. Cain's actions show us how sin, when allowed to grow, can destroy relationships and lead to devastating consequences. Cain's jealousy didn't just destroy his relationship with Abel, it also severed his connection with God. His anger and sin caused him to distance himself from God, and his refusal to repent further deepened this divide. The consequences of Cain's actions were not just the loss of his brother, but the breaking of his bond with God. Sin has a way of isolating us, not only from others but also from the source of our peace and strength. Cain's story is a powerful reminder of how destructive jealousy and unaddressed anger can be. Abel's death serves as a stark reminder of how unchecked jealousy and anger can have lasting effects. Cain's feelings of jealousy toward his brother led him to commit the first murder in human history, setting a tragic example of the consequences of sin. Abel's death wasn't just the loss of a brother. It symbolized the destructive power of sin that began with jealousy and escalated to violence. This teaches us that negative emotions, if left unaddressed, can spiral out of control and cause immense harm to ourselves and others. Ultimately, Abel's story teaches us valuable lessons about faith, obedience, and the consequences of sin. Abel's offering was accepted because it reflected his true trust and obedience to God. His life and death remind us of the importance of guarding our hearts against jealousy and anger, as these emotions can destroy relationships and cause lasting harm. By following Abel's example of faithfulness to God, we can avoid the destructive consequences that Cain's jealousy brought upon him and learn to live in harmony with God and others. Abel's story is one of faith, sacrifice, and tragedy. As the second son of Adam and Eve, Abel lived a life that reflected true devotion to God. His offering to God, a lamb from his flock, was accepted because it came from a heart of faith and obedience. Sadly, his brother Cain, consumed by jealousy and anger, murdered Abel, marking the first crime in human history. Abel's death set the stage for the consequences of sin, showing how unchecked emotions can lead to violence and division. Despite his tragic end, Abel's faith and trust in God serve as a lasting example for us all. Abel's life and death remind us of the importance of offering our best to God. His sincere faith and obedience in giving God a worthy offering were what set him apart. Abel didn't just give what was convenient. He gave his best, demonstrating his deep trust in God. His story challenges us to examine our own hearts and motivations when it comes to our relationship with God. Are we truly offering our best to Him, or are we merely going through the motions? Abel's example encourages us to reflect on our attitudes and ensure that we are giving God our heartfelt devotion and obedience. Furthermore, Abel's story serves as a warning about the destructive nature of jealousy and anger. Cain's inability to deal with his jealousy and bitterness led him to commit the first murder. This teaches us that negative emotions, if left unchecked, can lead to destructive actions. Instead of allowing jealousy and anger to control us, we should strive to seek peace and reconciliation. Abel's life reminds us of the importance of guarding our hearts and addressing our feelings before they lead to harm. As we reflect on Abel's story, we are reminded of the significance of our choices and their impact on others. The Bible teaches that our actions and attitudes toward others matter to God. Just as Abel's offering pleased God, we too can honor God by offering our lives in faith and obedience. We must be intentional in examining our hearts and ensuring that our actions reflect our love for God and others. Abel's example encourages us to live with sincerity, integrity, and a heart of worship. Who in your life can you make peace with today? Abel's story challenges us to look at our relationships and examine where we may need to seek forgiveness or reconciliation. Are there areas in your life where jealousy or anger have taken root? Take a moment to reflect on how you can bring more faith, kindness, and obedience into your relationships. Let's follow Abel's example by striving to honor God with our actions and words, showing love and grace to those around us. I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below and reflect on how you can apply the lessons from Abel's life in your own journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos that explore powerful lessons from the Bible and how we can live out our faith today.